Hello everyone, and welcome to Students as Teachers using Peer Teaching for Learner Autonomy. This is the webinar version of this training for those of you who were not able to attend the live training. And our agenda for this training is as follows. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what peer teaching is. Then we'll talk a little bit about why we might want to employ this strategy in our classrooms, the benefits that it could bring to our students. Then I'll talk a little about some of the limitations, so some of the things we have to keep in mind, ways in which it might not work or might be difficult to do. And then I'm going to go over 3 different types of activities you can do that are peer teaching activities. These are things you can use in the classroom. And after that, you will follow the link that you've been given in your email and take a quiz to prove that you have watched the webinar. So let's start by talking a little bit about what peer teaching is. One definition that I found was a suite of practices in which peers instruct each other in a purpose-driven, meaningful interaction. And there were a few things that I thought were interesting about this. First of all, the idea that it's a suite of practices, so maybe not just one activity or one particular thing, but that there's usually a series of steps that are involved in this, or perhaps a number of different practices that you could bring to your teaching. I also like that the word practices is used here because it's something that can be honed over time. It's something that we can make a regular part of our teaching. And I also like the reminder that it has to be purpose-driven and meaningful. So we have to have a clear goal, a clear aim that has to be communicated to the students, and it should be meaningful to them. They should be able to feel that they're getting something out of it. Another way of looking at it is any activity in which students are enlisted to help explain or give information to other students. And this I find interesting because if you look at it in this way, then we already do a lot of peer teaching. Anytime you do a jigsaw reading where student A reads one text and student B reads another one, you're involving some peer teaching. Anytime you have students check answers together before they report their answers to the class, there's opportunity for peer teaching there. But either way, in peer teaching, the teacher takes a backseat role. So they act as a resource, they provide feedback, they might moderate or help things move along, but really it's the students that are driving the activity. It's the students that are actually in charge of giving the information in a peer teaching situation. So now here are some of the reasons why we might choose to use peer teaching in our classrooms. First of all, I have this quote, "To teach is to learn twice," which I do think is a truth. Certainly, you've probably experienced this with your own teaching, that there are certain things you feel really comfortable teaching that you could do in your sleep. There are probably some other things that you have to teach, and like every time you go to teach it, you kind of have to review the rules. I know that adjective word order is one of those for me, that it's so intuitive. Every single time I teach it, I kind of have to remind myself what the sequence is. And so in this sense, every time I teach that, I'm kind of learning it twice. I'm making sure I understand it, then I'm explaining it to the students. And also, I'm sure you've had those experiences in your classrooms when you teach something and you think you have like a really great way of teaching it, and then you sort of learn some things about that language or about how the students are responding to what you've planned for them that help you learn more about that target language or about how to teach it better. And so the same would be true for our students, that if they're going to teach something to each other, they obviously really have to learn it well themselves. Here are some reported benefits of peer teaching. Improving competence in the subject area, so kind of what I just talked about, that if the students have to teach this, they're going to become really good at it. They'll become experts at it themselves. The development of autonomous learning skills. So this is something we really want to encourage here at EC, is not teaching the students to rely on the teacher so much, but teaching them to develop their own motivation, to use the tools at their disposal, to really kind of take ownership of their learning, and to realize that they do have a lot of power, and this is something that can help them do all of those things. Also, building confidence and self-esteem. So through the process of learning something and teaching it to other people, the students feel more confident using the language, and they can feel good about themselves. As, of course, you would imagine, peer teaching also helps students to work in a team. It helps them to develop their leadership skills because it involves a lot of teamwork and leading. And it can also foster positive attitudes towards school and the subject area. So even though it may be a big challenge at first, it's been shown that students have really started to feel good about the things they're learning. And there's my source, in case you're thinking that maybe I made all of this stuff up. I didn't. Now let's talk about some of the limitations or things that we would really need to consider when we employ peer teaching strategies in the classroom. First of all, peer teaching requires an atmosphere of comfort and trust. So this means, obviously you're probably not going to try and do this on the first day of class. It's something where the students have to be comfortable for them, or comfortable with each other, comfortable with you. They need not to be afraid to fail or make mistakes, in as much as that's possible. Also, it can take time for students to feel comfortable with this or warm up to the process. So you may experience a lot of resistance the first time you try to use peer teaching in your classroom. The students might say like, oh, you're the teacher, you know the right answer. Or they might say, oh, we don't know this well enough, or we can't teach each other, or this is going to be really hard. But you kind of need to coach them through it, provide a lot of support, remind them that whatever they come up with is going to be okay, is going to be good enough, will be a fulfillment of the assignment. And then once they've done it once, they'll see that it's possible, and it'll be much easier the next time you try it. This also, as I imagine is rather intuitive, tends to work best with the higher levels. So this is something you can do a lot at higher levels, not as much with lower levels. It would be pretty hard to do some of this at a beginner level, but getting into elementary and pre-intermediate, there are elements of this you can bring to the classroom, just with the teacher lending a bit more support. And the material must be carefully selected. So whatever resources you have the students use in order to teach each other, whatever you have them focus on, or the target language or the pronunciation, whatever it is that they're going to present or work with in teaching other students, it has to be something that's not too difficult. So these types of strategies can work really well for review, for example. If you have a level test coming up and you want them to review some of the major things that you've covered, it might be a good time to have them do some peer teaching at that point. Because if it's something that's too complex, then it probably won't go well, and then the students will end up feeling like it wasn't a successful lesson or a successful experience. So they don't have to be perfect, but it needs to be material that they can understand and use with relative ease. So now I would like to talk about these 3 different examples of peer teaching that I have prepared for you today. The first one is student-presented target language, and I've stolen something from one of the groups during our in-house training. There was a group that presented this style of peer teaching to the rest of the trainees, and they came up with a beautiful acronym, which I'm totally stealing with them because they did such an awesome job. So the aim of this activity is for students to master a grammar point or lexical set to the point where they can successfully teach it to the rest of the class and test the other students' learning. So this is kind of what you're going for. Whatever your guidelines are for the students, you want to make sure that they're presenting the information and testing the others on it. So the brilliant acronym that I mentioned is SPEAK. S-P-E-A-K. And so this is an acronym that we can use to remember sort of the steps that the teacher goes through in this particular type of activity. So S is separate students into groups. So the first thing you're going to do, simple enough, is put your students into different groups. And in those groups, the students are going to choose the target language or the lexical set or the topic from which they're going to come up with a lexical set. Basically, they're going to choose, or you're going to assign them what it is that they're going to present to the rest of the class. So you'll put them in groups. If it's a higher level, it's great to have them choose. Perhaps you could come up with a list of grammar points or maybe different aspects of one grammar point that you're going to have the different groups present. And if it's a lower level class, then maybe you'll just assign them. And so you've got your students in groups, and they've chosen or you've assigned them what it is they're going to teach. Next, you need to provide materials or resources for the students to use. So this could be the back of the textbook that you're going to have them look at the section there that explains the grammar and have them use that as their source material. Maybe you want to give them some charts from Azar or another book or a great website that you know of. Maybe you want to give them material from multiple sources. The main thing to keep in mind here that I'll reiterate from earlier in the webinar is that it's really important that you select this material carefully. So make sure it's simple enough for them to understand. Make sure it's information that they'll be able to prepare in the amount of time that you are giving them to do the assignment. Make sure that it's fairly straightforward. So it's going to take some legwork on your part at the beginning, but once you've found good source material, you can use it over and over again with class after class. Next, you need to make sure you establish guidelines. So this means the students need a very clear breakdown of what they are doing. So an example would be, all right, each group needs to give a 5-minute presentation of their grammar point, and they need to give at least 3 examples that illustrate the point as part of that presentation. Then they must come up with a quiz or game for the other students in the class to test them on the presentation. So that would be a list of like 4 guidelines there. So you want to make sure whatever it is, that you're going to have the students do as part of their presentation, they need to know exactly what those steps are. So those should be up on the board or in your PowerPoint if you like to use PowerPoint in class. But it should just be very clear to the students, these are the 4 things that you have to do. These are the things that you have to work on. Then the teacher is going to have an advisory role. So as the students work together, the teacher will monitor, circulate from group to group, answer any questions that the students may have. The teacher will also, maybe if a group is going in the wrong direction, kind of try and shepherd them back to where they belong. So the teacher will take on that advisory role to help the students out. Then the students will actually give their presentations. So they will present the passive voice, or they will present the second conditional, or they will present a list of words on the topic of cities or on the topic of diversity or whatever it is that they're working on. They'll test the rest of the students using the game or the quiz that they created. And then finally K, which actually stands for corrections, because we're going to cross out the K and write a C. It's a correction. Get it? I'm so impressed by the group that came up with that. So we cross out the K, make it a C, corrections, and feedback. So after the students have given their presentation, it would probably be a good idea to do this after each individual group so that everything's fresh in everyone's mind. But the teacher can then give some feedback, just in general on how the students did with their presentation. Did they work really hard on it? Did they come up with a really creative game? Could they have spent more time on it? And then also, this is the time for the teacher to fill in anything that the students may have missed, or to clarify anything that wasn't completely clear in the presentation that the students gave. So this is sort of a basic peer teaching structure that you could use in a lot of different ways. It is something that the students will find challenging, especially at first, but in my experience, it does tend to work quite well. Next, I'd like to tell you about a writer's workshop. So the aim of this activity is for students to engage in peer editing and constructive criticism, as well as learning to thoughtfully critique and edit their own work. And what I like about this activity is I think it does a lot to sort of foster that second part. Students are often sort of reticent to edit, or they don't think they know which mistakes they've made, or they don't think they're good enough to correct their own work. And this is an activity that can really help them learn to start doing that. So the first thing that you need to do in this activity is prepare student writing. For this type of an activity, most likely you're going to use writing from a previous class. So maybe the last class you had with the students, maybe the class before that, hopefully something that's not too old, unless you want to drive home the point that they've improved a lot since a long time ago, which you could do. But you're going to take the student writing and you need to make some copies of it. And you need to make sure that you have the students' names blocked out, because anonymity is important. So you could, if you're already planning to do this in advance, when you have the students do the in-class writing or homework, have them write under a pseudonym, or tell them not to write their name on the paper. But if you do have names on the paper, you can just take a Post-it note and kind of fold it over and over the name, and then just photocopy the writing with that name concealed. And you'll probably want to make 3 or 4 copies of each piece of student writing, depending on how large your groups are going to be as part of the workshop. So I've got 3 copies of each student's writing, and now I'm going to assign a number or maybe a letter to each student's piece. So this used to be like Chonghua So's writing, but I've covered the name, I've copied it, and now it's going to be writing number 1. So I'll just write a number 1 in the upper right or left-hand corner of each of my 3 copies of that piece of writing. And then I'll do the same with all of the rest of the students' writing. So now, instead of having writing with each of my students' names on it, I have writing number 1, and I have 3 copies of that. I have 3 copies of writing number 2, 3 copies of writing number 3, and so on. So that's basically what you need to prepare in advance of class. When you're doing the writer's workshop, you need to establish the criteria on which the writing is going to be judged. So this is something that you could prepare in advance as the teacher. Maybe there are certain things that you want the students to focus on. So you could say, for example, as one of your criteria or questions, content. So does the writer answer the question fully? Did the writer understand the question? Did the writer develop his or her answers well? You could also say, did the writer use the passive voice correctly, if that's something that you're focusing on that week in class? Or did the writer use third conditionals correctly, if that's what you're focusing on? Or you could be more general and say, what do you notice about the accuracy of language in this piece? Maybe another criterion that you would want to have would be something about the organization. So is the format correct? Is the writing divided into paragraphs? And you could also comment on aspects of style. You know, is this logical? Is it easy to read? Did you enjoy it as a reader? So either you, the teacher, are going to come up with a list of things that you want the students to especially look at and comment on in their workshop, or perhaps as a class, you could all talk together and come up with a list on the board of which things you think are the most important things to look for in the writing. And that would make it even more student-centered. Also, before you begin the workshop, you need to go over some rules or guidelines for critique. So just the way in which the critique should be done. So things like, we refer to all writers as him, her, or writer number X. So we're not going to say, oh, I'm pretty sure this is Julia's writing, and I think Julia did a really good job with it. Instead, we'll say, well, I think writer number 2 wrote a really interesting short story. I couldn't wait to hear what happened next, and so on and so forth. So it's important to make sure that the students know that we're going to keep anonymity unless they want to reveal themselves. Another thing that's good to go over with the students is sort of that the criticism they give should be constructive. So you shouldn't just say that something's bad, but you should say how it might be fixed or what the writer could do to improve it. That we want to give positive feedback in addition to improvement comments. And of course that all comments should be made in a respectful way. It's something, even if you have a really nice class, sometimes students will kind of want to be funny, or they might say something that could potentially hurt someone's feelings. So it's just a good idea to kind of go over that at the beginning before you start. So here's the way the workshop itself is going to go. So you'll divide the students into groups. And let's say I have a class of 12, so I divide it into 4 groups of 3. I'm going to give writing number 1 to group number 1. I have 3 copies of it. I'm going to give writing number 2 to group number 2, 3 copies of it, and so on and so forth. So now each writer in each group has their own copy of one of the writings, and each group has the same writing. So within one group, all of the students will read the piece of writing, and then they will discuss it for maybe 5 or 10 minutes based on the criteria that you established or that you gave them. So they'll read it and say, okay, what do we think about writer number 1's piece? And kind of take some notes. They need to take notes in their notebook, not on the photocopy, because they're going to give the photocopy to another group. So after the 5 or 10 minutes are over, then each group will pass their 3 copies to the right. So now group number 2 has writing number 1, and group number 3 has writing number 2, and so on. So you're going to repeat this process until all 4 groups have read all 4 pieces of writing and commented on them in their group and taken some notes on each piece of writing. Then each group is going to share its feedback on the final piece of writing that it has, or that it ends up with. So if group number 1 started with writing number 1, they're going to end with writing number 4, and then they're going to share their comments with the group about writing number 4. And the other groups will also share their comments about their pieces of writing. And since the students have taken notes, they'll be able to chime in once each group is done kind of presenting their main thoughts with anything they disagree with, anything that the groups didn't say that they may have noticed. So basically group 1 will talk about writing number 4, and then the other 3 groups will have the chance to add anything, disagree with anything, just really agree with anything that they think was definitely true that group said. And then the teacher will step in and give any necessary feedback. So if there's something really important that none of the students noticed, then the teacher will need to bring that up about the writing. Or if there's anything that maybe the students think that the teacher really strongly disagrees with about the writing, then the teacher would need to bring that up as well. Because obviously, some things just have to do with opinion and how you feel, but if anyone's gotten anything really wrong, then the teacher will certainly need to clear that up. All right, and finally, I have a couple of peer-taught pronunciation activities to go over with you. So the goal of these activities is for the students to use their own strengths, or basically focus on sounds that are easy for them to help other students improve. And one of the reasons why this is a good thing is that oftentimes when we teach pronunciation in class, because we here in New York are dealing with a lot of different L1s, we end up with students who end up having to work on a sound that's really easy for them. So if I'm working on L's and R's for the Asian students in my class, that's not going to be so interesting for the European students in my class, and that's kind of a difficult thing that we have to deal with at times. So this is a great way to have the students teach other students sounds that are easy for them, and it gives them a lot of ownership, and it makes it seem like nobody's wasting their time. So the first activity is called minimal pair share. And what happens in this activity is the students will either work as individuals or more likely pairs, because there's more opportunity to help each other and more opportunity for authentic communication. So the students will work in pairs, and they're going to choose a sound, a minimal pair sound. So maybe and or f and v and f, or p and f. Basically any two sounds that have just one difference. And the teacher will kind of model with his or her own list how to help other students practice pronouncing words and how you might help correct them. So to make sure this happens in a kind and clear way. And then the students or the teacher are going to create a list of words that showcase the minimal pair that they've chosen. So for lower levels, it's probably better if the teacher just gives the student a list of words that they're going to teach the other students. If it's a higher level, and the students have a lot of vocabulary, then you might want to try having them come up with their own list and maybe just sort of giving them some ideas or some prompting. So for example, if I were doing and L and R, lip, rip, tower, towel, load, road. And maybe you would have even more than this, maybe a list of 10 words or 12 or something like that. So then what's going to happen once the students have made their list is they will be put together with another pair or another group. And as the teacher, you may want to kind of engineer this so that, the students who are teaching L and R end up with the students who are teaching S and Z or something like that, so that everybody gets to work on something that's a challenge for them. So one pair of students will have the other pair that's with them read through their list, and the original pair of students will make corrections, help them out, help them practice, and then they'll switch. And then you could have the pairs switch and practice a new sound with a different pair, and switch again, practice a new sound with a different pair. This could also be done as a sound recognition exercise where pair number 1 reads words from their list, and pair number 2 raises their right hand if it's the R sound, and then raises their left hand if it's the L sound. So that could work better at lower levels where they have even a hard time distinguishing what the sound is supposed to be or what the sound sounds like. But it's nice to do it the other way as well, the original way, because you do want the students to have a chance to actually practice trying to say the sounds correctly. And, you could even have them kind of mirror the mouth or the face shape that the students who are teaching them are making. So the next activity is adopt a vowel, and it's similar but different. So in this activity, the students would work in pairs, and each pair would adopt a vowel sound. So it could be like or ah or any of those vowels. And a good anchor for this would be the back of the American English file textbooks. They all have a list of different phonemes and vowel sounds. And they have pictures that help you remember which sound they are. And there's also a vowel color chart that you can Google on the internet. It's a color vowel chart, I believe is what it's called. And it'll be like the ow in brown or the in purple. So it's another way for the students to kind of remember what the sound is they've chosen. So they'll choose a sound, and then they're going to make a list of words that contain that sound. So they'll work together, think of words that contain the sound. The teacher will monitor and support them, and definitely needs to check to make sure that all of the words on their list do have that vowel sound. They may, make some mistakes, so that would be the time for the teacher to come by and say, "Oh, are you sure that this is the sound? Let's say this word a few times," and then they could take the word off their list, cross it off, and find a different word that does actually have the vowel sound. Then split the class into 2 groups. So as they work in pairs, before you split them up, you're going to need to make sure that each student has their same list of words, because you're going to split the students up. So one member of each pair is going to go into one of the 2 new groups. And now, within each of the 2 groups, the students are going to stand in 2 lines facing each other. So one student will be standing across from another student in kind of a long line. And so I'm a student. I have another student standing across from me. I'm going to have the student standing across from me read my list of words, and they're going to work on pronouncing that vowel. And I'm going to correct them if they make mistakes, try and help them, show them the shape of my mouth. Or maybe if it's an advanced group, cover my mouth so that they can really listen and not just see what sound I'm making. And then they're going to have to add 2 more words to my list that have that same vowel sound. So they'll practice all the words on my list. Once they've practiced enough, they're going to add 2 words to my list. Then I'm going to practice all the words on their list and add 2 more words to their list that has the same vowel sound that they chose. And then the groups are going to shift. So like the person at the end of one line will come around to the beginning. Now everyone has a new partner. And your 2 groups that you have in the class are doing this simultaneously. So you essentially have like 4 lines in 2 different parts of the classroom doing the same thing. A possible extension or alternative for this activity would be to have students do role plays where they use the words that have their vowel sounds in them. So you could do this after doing the first activity, or instead of it, have the students do a role play, and then the other students, while they're watching for active listening, could count the number of words where the vowel sound occurs. Or they could guess what the vowel sound is if you're doing it as an alternative rather than an extension. So that could be a really fun, very active way to do this same sort of thing as well. So that's all for our webinar today. Now please go ahead and follow the link in your email and take the quiz that I've prepared for you. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.